Why does my leg feel limp and weak after I only run just a couple of miles? The answer to that question coming up next. Hey FreeBody family, Kat Matlock here at the clinic in Asheville, North Carolina. And I had a question on the channel yesterday about a guy asked, when I run just a couple miles, my left leg starts acting up and it starts to go limp. Is this false sciatica? Well, yes and no. I wanna unpack this a little bit because this is really important, and I see a lot of runners with this issue. And he said, I know my left hip is a little bit higher, and I would have guessed that immediately because that often is the case on the high hip side. False sciatica is going to be more about pain and having a deep ache and sciatica symptoms other than just hip weakness. So I don't know if he's having pain. He didn't answer that question to me. But what I do know is that when that left hip is high relative to the right, that means the glute min and the glute med and the TFL, all these muscles on the outer hip, are being pulled long. And they're full of trigger points. Muscles that are pulled long are always full of trigger points. So it will often light up their pain referral patterns, but the least it's going to do in this situation is make the hip weak, and it feels like you can't stand, you can't put weight on that leg, let alone run on it. So here's the thing. The glute min, the glute med on either side of the pelvis are what I call the rotator cuff of the hip. That means they are working to stabilize the femur in the socket every step that you take. And it's going to be amplified. They're going to have to contract a lot more and stabilize that femur in the socket a lot more when you run because there's that much more pressure. Now, when the left hip is high, in this case, and those left glute min and glute med are, and TFL are freaking out, they're holding their trigger points. They can't push that femur back into the socket. They're trying to anchor the femurs in the socket, just like the rotator cuff of the shoulder anchors the humerus in the socket. The glutes, the rotator cuff of the hip, anchor the femur in the socket. So when muscles hold trigger points, they get tired. They get exhausted because a trigger point is a contraction. Part of the muscle where that trigger point lives is kind of in a constant state of contraction. When it's contracting like that, it uses energy. Of course, a muscle has to have energy to contract. When it's stuck in a trigger point and it's in a constant state of contraction, it's using up all of its energy reserves, so that then you do something like run or hike or go up and down stairs a whole bunch, and the glutes have to work that much harder to stabilize the femur in the socket, and they're exhausted. They're like, oh, dude, I am so done already. I'm already so tired. Why are you running? Why are you doing this to me? And so the leg will kind of give out under your weight, like, whoa, and it just feels like, oh God, I can't get enough power and strength on that side. So the way to fix it, now he knows he has a left hip high, so I'm going to link in the description what to do if you have a left hip high, what are the parts that you have to release, and that's just like a super quick practice. You could do a really full releasing practice to really balance the tissues. But essentially what happens in that case when that left hip is high is that the outer glutes are pulled long, but the quadratus lumborum in the low back is squashed short. And often those inner thighs are also short. But it also means that the outer right hip is going to be squashed short. So sometimes you can fix one hip being higher than the other just by releasing the glutes on the other side. So what I'm going to recommend to you, this subscriber who asked me that question yesterday, is to release the outer hip on the right side before you run. Don't just try to release the glute min and the glute med on the outer left hip. What I always say on this channel regularly is Often where you're feeling pain or dysfunction, it's the end of the line. It's not the beginning of the tensional train, it's the end of the line. So in this case, releasing just the outer left hip is never going to work. Just releasing the glute min, glute med, TFL on the left side, even though those are the muscles that are having the trouble, that's never going to fix it because they're already too long. Strengthening might help, but it might actually activate those trigger points worse, which is why a lot of people, when they have physical therapy and they're working on strengthening practices, then they often get those trigger points are more activated. So what you must do first is release the outer right hip with a left hip high. You've got to release the other side first. It will help to also release quadratus lumborum in the low back. Of course, I'm going to link all these videos in the description. It will help to release the inner thighs on the left side because they're also short. But you want to think in your mind, lengthen what's short, release what's short, right? Lengthen what's short, strengthen what's long. But if you're not doing the release part, releasing and stretching and opening and using balls and a percussion massager on the short stuff, the long stuff is never going to get better. Okay? So you got to release that. Even if you just release the outer right hip and then go for a run, it should feel better. Because what you're doing is by releasing this squashed up side and allowing that to lengthen, that will automatically start softening the pull and on that left side and give a little reprieve. So the key takeaways are, when a muscle is pulled long, as this, in this case, high hip, when a muscle is pulled long, the muscle cannot do its job well. When one hip is higher than the other, that side, in this case the left side, that left hip is higher, glute min, glute med, TFL, they are pulled long, they get loaded with trigger points, they get weak. Key takeaway number 2, trigger points make muscles weak, okay? They can't do their job. Key takeaway number 3, those outer hip muscles, glute min, glute med, TFL, are stabilizers. They're the rotator cuff of the hip. So when you're running, you need them to be able to activate with strength to stabilize that femur in the socket. Otherwise, it's going to feel like you're going to go down, right? Which is what this subscriber is experiencing. So what you must do is, key takeaway number 4, start on the opposite side. Release the outer right hip, in this case, first before you go run, and then release the outer left hip. Bring a ball with you when you run. When it starts acting up on the run, just pull off to the side, right? Get down on a ball on the right side, release that outer right hip, then get the ball on the left side, release the outer left hip, and then get back to the trail. You should immediately feel better, truly. Immediately. So I hope that's helpful. Send questions, put questions on videos. I will usually either answer them right there in the thread, in the comment section, or like this, I'm going to be doing more of these videos so I can answer your questions directly. Kat Matlock here at FreeBody. Thank you so much for watching.